All right, here we go. Today we have Jacob Anthony Angeli Chansley, who's better known as the QAnon Shaman, fresh out of prison for his role in the January 6th Capitol attack. Welcome to VladTV.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Well, thank you for coming. Well, it's your first time here. I want to start in the very beginning. So you were born and raised in Phoenix, Arizona.
Yes, born and raised Phoenix, Arizona.
Okay, and what was Phoenix, Arizona like during that time?
Well, it was nothing like it is now. There's a lot more homeless people, a lot more poverty, a lot more drug use, but I suppose that's always kind of been there. Maybe I'm just grown up enough now to realize it. But there's definitely a lot more homeless. There's like a homeless encampment over by the Capitol that was never there before.
Okay, so growing up as a teenager, were you a generally good kid or were you getting in trouble, getting arrested, that type of thing?
Oh no, I was a good kid, man. I never got arrested. No criminal record whatsoever.
Okay, so you go to high school, you graduate, and then right after graduation, you join the Navy?
That's correct.
Okay, and why did you want to join the Navy?
I wanted to serve my country. I wanted to see the world. I wanted to do the right thing. My dad was in the Navy, and he encouraged me to go in, so that's what I did. I went in, I served, I got some military training, and, I can say I enjoyed myself for the most part.
Okay, now I read that when you were in the Navy, you didn't want to take the anthrax vaccine?
That is correct. So I was refusing vaccines before it was cool.
Okay, so at the point that you told the Navy, I refuse to take the vaccine, what happened next?
Well, they basically gave me and the other small group, I think it was like 3 other people on the ship that didn't take it, the opportunity several times to take it. Every time we refused, they eventually brought us to captain's mast. They docked us in pay. They lowered our rank. They gave us 45 days restriction and what is known as an administrative separation from the Navy. So it's like, it's called a general discharge under honorable conditions. So it's like you never joined. So you don't really get your VA benefits or you don't get your GI Bill, but you also don't get a tainted record either.
Okay, so how long were you in the Navy until you were actually discharged?
2 years.
2 years. So what year did you actually get out of the Navy?
I got out in 2007, joined in 2005.
Okay, so in 2007, you're out of the Navy. What do you do career-wise at that point?
Well, after that, I got a job as a courier, delivering packages, an independent contractor, driving my own vehicle. And I did that for 8 months or so. But unfortunately, I got in a minor car accident, totaled my vehicle, didn't do any damage to the vehicle in front of me. And because I didn't have the money to replace my vehicle, I had to move on and do something else.
Okay, so what were you doing for a number of years in order to support yourself?
Well, I had a number of odd jobs that I absolutely freaking hated. Working at department stores, working at sub shops. I tried multi-level marketing. ACN is the name of the corporate or the name of the company. Actually, interesting enough, it was a company that was endorsed by Donald Trump. It was on his Celebrity Apprentice show. That was actually kind of a big selling point for me. It was that Donald Trump was like, yeah, you know what, this company is good. But being young, I didn't quite understand how it is that it was going to take so much work and that I should probably have something on the side that was helping me to supplement my income. So that didn't work out as well as I had hoped. I was also, like I said, very young, so I didn't quite understand business and marketing and all that stuff. But, I did that for a while. I also sold Kirby's. I hate sales. I sold Kirby's for 4 months. That was absolutely awful. 10 to 14-hour days and 6 days a week. And I only made 4 sales in 4 months because I could not stand selling something to somebody when they said they didn't want it. And that's virtually what you have to do. If they say, no, I don't want it, you have to say, well, how about another price? And I just couldn't do that.
Okay, so in 2016, Trump gets elected. Did you actually vote for Trump?
Absolutely.
Okay, and you became a hardcore Trump supporter at that point?
No.
Okay.
I watched him very, very closely and very skeptically. But there's no way in hell I'm voting for Hillary Clinton.
Okay. All right. So at what point did the whole QAnon thing happen with you?
Well, Q started, I believe, on October 28, 2017. And I had been following quite closely the email leaks from John Podesta and Hillary Clinton that were on WikiLeaks. I had written a book around the time that Q had gone public, basically. It was called One Mind at a Time, A Deep State of Illusion. I finished that in 2017. I didn't publish it until 2020 once I saw everything that was going on. You can get it on Amazon. It's only 150 pages. It's only $9.99. I don't make very much money on it. What matters to me is the message gets out there more than anything. But I watched Q and Trump very closely for years before I made my mind up.
Okay. And at one point, you actually started attending rallies and so forth in support of QAnon, right?
Well, yes and no. I had been going down to the Arizona State Capitol for years in this regalia and protesting on my own, by myself, singing my shamanic song, banging on my drum down at the Arizona State Capitol for many years before anything Q-related or Trump-related became even a thought. So I've been somewhat politically active on my own for years prior to 2020, when I got really active nationally and behind Trump and bringing the sign Q sent me.
Right. And what gave you the idea to wear the headdress and the horns and everything?
Well, I've been dressing this way for years. I've been dressing this way since I think 2012 is when I really started getting intense with it. It's a shamanic regalia that is quite common in the Hioka tradition as far as creating a shock to the system, a shock to the cognitive system. The Hioka shaman does things that some people would consider bizarre or backward, and this is done to shock the cognitive system of the tribe so that when the shaman is able to converse with the tribal members, then what ends up happening is they're able to plant seeds and help them to understand that their culturally programmed view of reality is not reality. So it's an ancient technique that I've been practicing for over 10 years.
Okay. Well, in 2020, the election happens with Trump and Biden. And, Trump ends up losing the election. Biden wins the election. But you would actually protest outside, one of the buildings in Arizona where you basically declared the election has not been called. Don't believe that lie. They got their hands caught in the cookie jar and we're going to the Supreme Court. Trump always looks like he's going to lose and then he wins, right?
Yep.
Okay. Why did you feel like the election was stolen at that point?
Well, here's the thing. First of all, if you look into American history and the history with our elections, JFK won the election in 1960 because his father had connections to the mob, the FBI, and the CIA. So our elections have been corrupt. All right. And every time the Democrats lose, what do? They scream election fraud. They scream it's rigged. They scream, oh, this is, election interference. Something needs to be done. These voting machines. I mean, there's literally so many videos of Democrats whining and crying about the voting machines after 2016. And what do the Republicans do when they lose elections? Oh, there's election fraud. This is all rigged. We need to do something different. These voting machines, blah, 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 blah. So it's clear to me that the centrist view is that the elections are corrupt, and they've been corrupt for decades. And if you think for 1 second that Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama got less votes than Joe Biden while he campaigned in his basement and fumbled over his words for almost a year, if you expect me to believe that this lame duck candidate who, we don't even get into the election interference, the way the 51 intelligence agents said the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation and all that stuff. And then the Zucker boxes, the mail-in ballots, ballot harvesting. It's the most unsecure election we've ever had in our nation's history. Mark Elias was going around the country changing the election laws in courts in all of these swing states. So, to me, it's if there's evidence of election corruption and what I call a selection process, not an election process, if there's evidence of a selection process and our elections are corrupted for decades, then why would 2020 be any different?
We could all agree or disagree when it comes to this type of thing, but there was a January 6th committee that actually looked at the overall situation with Trump and the overturn of the 2020 election. And according to them, there was a 7-part plan to overturn the election. Like I said, I'm not saying it's true. I'm not saying it's not true, but this is what the findings, this is what came out in the findings. So, number one, Trump had acknowledged that he lost the 2020 election, but spread misinformation to the American public and made false statements claiming significant voter fraud that led to his defeat. Number two, Trump planned to remove and replace the Attorney General and Justice Department officials in an effort to force the DOJ to support false allegations of election fraud. Number three, Trump pressured Vice President Pence to refuse certified electoral votes in the official count on January 6th in violation of the U.S. Constitution. Number four, Trump pressured state lawmakers and election officials to alter election results in his favor. Number five, Trump's legal team and associates directed Republicans in 7 states to produce and send fake alternate electoral slates to Congress and the National Archives. Number six, Trump summoned and assembled a destructive mob in Washington and sent them to march on the U.S. Capitol, a.k.a. the Stop the Steal rally. Now, when did you find out about the Stop the Steal rally?
Well, hold on a second. Let's address something really quick.
Okay.
The January 6th committee is filled with mostly Democrats and 2 Republicans that are Washington, D.C. uniparty establishment crooks. Okay, I'm not a fan of Dick Cheney, and therefore I'm not a fan of Liz Cheney. And I'm definitely not a fan of Kinzinger. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, these are the same people that for 4 years said Russia, 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 which many of them knew none of it was true. What we saw with the January 6th committee was called a show trial, and it is very, very common amongst communists to do this as a means of using psychological warfare techniques on the public to change the verdict in the court of public opinion. Okay, so the January 6th committee was a show. It was a sham. I mean, think about it, man. They literally doctored evidence. There's a woman named Jennifer that has come out and talked about how they put a blue check mark by her Twitter handle. They changed her profile picture. They did all sorts of things to make her look different in that January 6th committee. Okay. And another thing, they also touted this notion that the officers were killed on that day, when it has come out quite clearly that Officer Sicknick was not killed on that day, and that the other officers that they were saying were killed on that day actually committed suicide shortly thereafter. And I don't think it had anything to do with January 6th. I think it had everything to do with these officers quite possibly receiving indictments from the DOJ. So we cannot trust proven liars to tell us the truth. If we do, we are fools. And it's much easier to fool people than convince them they've been fooled. So I just refute entirely their conclusions, especially considering these people are uniparty Washington. They've been in politics for decades, and they have been proven liars throughout those decades. Now, to answer your question, when it comes to the 2020 election, when it comes to Trump, when it comes to all this January 6th stuff, and tell me if I don't answer your question here. The allegations of voter fraud, okay, the allegations of election interference are irrefutable. They're irrefutable. But the Operation Mockingbird Media, which is run by the CIA, okay, is using psychological warfare techniques to divide the country around very real facts. And the real facts are that this is the most unstable, the most volatile election we've ever had. COVID changed everything. And to sit there and say that something like voter fraud didn't happen when you have dead people voting, when you have people to unknown addresses voting, when you have things like signature verification, social security number verification, and witness verification, all those things are wiped from the mail-in ballots. And then to say that we don't have voter fraud, to say that we don't have election interference is just, it's repugnant.
Okay, well, Trump announced the Stop the Steal rally in order to back up his claims of election fraud. At what point did you find out about the rally and decided to go?
Oh, yeah. Well, so I was in Arizona where a lot of this stuff was going down. So I found out about it, I believe, sometime in December.
Okay. And what made you decide to go to Washington, D.C.?
Well, I went to Washington, D.C. in December as well for the second MAGA Million March. And I dressed this way. And no media outlets were screaming or pointing the finger and, QAnon Shaman, it was only because I went there on January 6th that I got the notoriety that I got. But I had been active in politics in Arizona for some time. I went to the Stop the Steal rally on January 5th. I went to a number of them here in Arizona throughout the course of the 3 months, after the election, from November, December, and then into January.
Okay. So as the certification process was underway, Trump gave a speech encouraging all his followers to march to the Capitol. Were you already at the Capitol or did you march to the Capitol?
No, I was not at the Capitol, but I recall him saying, peacefully make your voice heard. I recall him saying that very much so.
Okay. So now you're in front of the Capitol building and you're dressed in the same, get up that you have now, but you also had a spear with an American flag at the end of it, right?
What I had was a staff.
Okay. All right.
And yes, the American flag was attached to my staff.
Okay. So this is where things get a little bit fuzzy. So how did you actually enter the building?
Well, unfortunately for you and for me, because I very much want to converse about this, I have a motion in the courts at the current moment that my lawyer has told me to not talk about anything regarding my actions on that day or the events of that day, because of the fact that we have this motion in the courts and we want to see what the courts are going to do with it, what the judge is going to do. And he doesn't want me to talk about anything regarding that day. I can talk about the events leading up to, I can talk about my arrest, I can talk about what solitary confinement was like, what it was like getting released, what prison was like, all that stuff. But unfortunately for us and your audience, we can't dive too deeply into any of that.
Okay, well, the reason I mentioned it was because later on, there was a video that was released of you walking around inside the Capitol being led around by the police. And Elon Musk even tweeted, this is crazy. The public was misled.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I can say that, the media and the government definitely, and that's why I don't trust the January 6th committee at all. The American people were misled. That's just all there is to it. It's a psychological warfare operation. It is a psyop. That's just all there is to it.
Well, according to reports, 5 people died either shortly before, during, or following the actual event. Ashley Bobbitt was killed by Capitol Police, essentially trying to climb in through a window. I assume you weren't anywhere near that area when Ashley got killed, right?
That is correct. I was not anywhere near that area, but we're not going to go deeper into my actions on January 6th at this time.
Fair enough. When you found out that Ashley Bobbitt was killed, what did you think?
It was tragic. She's an unarmed woman, like 5 foot nothing.
Okay. Well,
she's not a threat to anybody.
When you have a mob of hundreds of people attacking a building and she is climbing in through a window surrounded by hundreds of other people, and you have a police officer that's trying to protect the actual politicians in there, I don't think you could say that she just wasn't a threat. I think she actually was a threat.
They didn't shoot any Antifa or any BLM that were doing the exact same thing all throughout 2020 for over 200 days.
Okay. I can't speak on that, but I could say
I can.
Seeing the scene that was inside of there, I could see how a police officer would protect, a situation like that with deadly force. I would probably do the same thing.
From what I understand, the congressmen were already evacuated at the time. But I really can't get into it too much, unfortunately. We could go back and forth all day on this. I will argue into the 9th hour if I believe in something. But unfortunately, we can't dive too deep into the details of the events of January 6th.
Okay, well, the situation happened. 138 officers were injured, along with literally hundreds of other people. Like you mentioned in the very beginning, 4 officers who responded to the attack died by suicide within 7 months of the situation. Plus, a lot of people got hurt. People had heart attacks. It was a chaotic situation, to say the least. And I guess after the riot, you spoke to reporters and you said the fact that we had a bunch of traitors in office hunker down, put on their gas masks and retreat into the underground bunker, I consider that a win.
Okay.
So the whole situation happens and you weren't arrested or detained or anything else like that day, right?
That is correct. Now, something I think is really important to mention here is that there were over 1 million people in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. Over 1 million, okay? And the amount of people that were breaking the law at the Capitol on that day is literally less than 1% of the people that were in Washington, D.C. on that day protesting the election. So what has happened is that the media has chosen to shine a spotlight on a very specific event. And they have had the nerve to say that it was the worst tragedy in American history. They've compared it to Pearl Harbor and 9/11. They said that it was the worst thing to ever happen to the Capitol, when they completely ignore the fact that the Weather Underground blew up the Capitol in the 70s. The fact that Puerto Ricans literally stormed the Capitol and shot congressmen. Okay, that happened, I think, in the 50s or the 60s. And they just completely ignore those things because it was their side that was doing these things. Okay, the fact of the matter is, what the media has done, what these congressmen have done, is something called neuro-linguistic programming, where they are attempting to associate a very specific event and shocking images and trigger words with events from our past that are traumatic to the American people. And in doing this, they are attempting with all of their might to gain centralized power. And this is the rule, not the exception with governments. This is the rule, not the exception with tyranny, is that they use and exploit certain situations as an excuse to centralize power and increase their authority.
Well, hundreds of people stormed the Capitol, but clearly you stood out based on the way that you're dressed, right? So on January 8th, you were posted as a person of interest with the Washington, D.C. police. While you're actually being wanted, you did an interview with NBC. You said you didn't do anything wrong. I walked through an open door, dude. And you said you weren't worried about possible charges and you had no criminal record before this whole situation. But then on January 9th, you were actually arrested and brought up on U.S. federal charges of knowingly entering or remaining in any restricted building or on grounds without lawful authority and with a violent entry and disorderly conduct on Capitol grounds. You were indicted on 6 charges, 2 of which were felonies. How did you feel when you got arrested? And number one, how did you get arrested?
I called the FBI when I found out they were looking for me. I set up a meeting with them because I don't run. I don't tuck my tail and run. I don't hide. I'm not a coward. I'm a man of honor and integrity. If the FBI is looking for me, just like Jesus in the garden, bro, here I am. I am he. Okay. So I turned myself in. I went into the field office. They told me they weren't going to arrest me, and naively, I believed them. Okay. They said they just wanted to talk. And so I talked to them. As soon as I got in the interrogation room, they read me my Miranda rights.
Okay. So you get arrested and now you go to jail for the first time. I remember there was an article that you refused to eat because the food wasn't organic, and they actually had a court order to give you organic food.
That is correct. A court order that the gulag in D.C. could not comply with, either would not or could not.
Okay. And then you get a lawyer, Watkins, right?
Your timeline is off. I got the lawyer when I was in Arizona in Florence, and he was my lawyer and is the one that filed the motion to get me an organic diet.
Got it.
Al Watkins was probably the worst lawyer I could have picked to represent me.
Okay, well, Watkins made a written statement saying that you had no part in the violence, did not hide your identity, you were unarmed, not destructive, and you followed the instructions of law enforcement officials in a respectful manner. Also, he presented evidence that you had been diagnosed with schizophrenia while serving in the Navy.
Well, that's also misinformation. No, I was not diagnosed with schizophrenia.
Okay.
What I was diagnosed with was
Mhm.
something called schizotypal personality disorder. And basically what that is that is a diagnosis that basically you believe strange things and you are awkward in social situations that cause you to isolate yourself from time to time, basically. And like by that rationale, over half the world has schizotypal personality disorder, bro.
Okay.
So you got to understand the modern psychology is a group of shouting charlatans. They don't fully know or understand how the brain works or why it works the way that it does. What they've done is they've put labels over people, in particular children, that have a bunch of symptoms that they can then use as an excuse to medicate people and make money off of them. Why do you think they're prescribing children amphetamines?
Well, you yourself, had you ever been on medication leading up to this situation?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't take drugs, dude. I don't do drugs.
Got it. Okay. So now you're locked up and you're awaiting, either a trial or a plea deal and so forth. And your lawyer is speaking to the media and he said some fairly harsh things. He says that, his client, you, and other accused Capitol rioters were uniquely vulnerable to being misled by Trump. He said a lot of these defendants, they're all fucking short bus people. These are people with brain damage. They're fucking retarded. But they're our brothers, our sisters, our neighbors, our co-workers. They're part of our country. These aren't bad people. They don't have prior criminal history. Fuck. They're subjected to 4+ years of goddamn propaganda, the likes of which the world has not seen since fucking Hitler. Have you heard that?
My lawyer is not a very good representation of me, what I believe, and I don't agree with anything that he said. The fact of the matter is, we have seen propaganda campaigns, the likes of which are like Hitler, over the last several decades. It's called Operation Mockingbird. The CIA infiltrated the media, and they have been controlling the narrative and propagandizing the American people to go to war with foreign nations, of which these foreign nations have resources that certain corporations that collude with our government have interest in. These are proxy wars. They are wars quite often not declared by Congress, but what they do is they exchange public money and they put it into private hands through non-government organizations and contractors. This is a war machine, and it's been going on since Operation Paperclip, which is when the Nazis, were brought over here. The worst of the worst, their war criminals, their war crimes were wiped clean. They were given false identities and put at some of the highest levels of appointed power in our country. Look at Werner von Braun, head of NASA. Okay, that's just one example. So the fact of the matter is, Al Watkins is wrong.
Well, your lawyer, Watkins, actually publicly called on Trump to pardon you, arguing that you were unarmed, not violent, not destructive, and had been acting on the invitation of the president. Did you feel at that point that Trump was going to pardon you?
Well, first of all, he's not my lawyer anymore. He's my previous attorney.
Okay.
And secondly, I hoped so, but I don't fault him for not.
Okay. Well, the pardon was not granted. Basically your lawyer said that you regret very much having not just been duped by the president, but being in a position where you were allowed that duping to put you in a position to make decisions you should not have made. Were those your words or his?
I never asked him to say that. Never said it myself. He said all sorts of things on my behalf that weren't true. He said I felt duped by Trump. Never said it. Never asked him to say it. He said that I denounced Q and the QAnon community. Never said it. Never asked him to say it. He said that I was a short bus, retard, schizophrenic, bipolar, depressed, and delusional, none of which was in my psychological evaluation. In fact, in my psychological evaluation, it says the antithesis of that. It says that I am not being diagnosed with schizophrenia, that I am not delusional. And I can show you in black and white sometime if you'd like to see.
Well, according to your ex-lawyer, he also said that you were prepared to testify against Trump in a second impeachment trial. However, it ended in acquittal, without any witnesses being called. So were you actually prepared to testify against Trump?
No, he said all sorts of stuff in the media that I never asked him to say.
Right. Well, he had also asked for you to be released, but on March 8, 2021, a federal judge actually ruled they should not be released, saying that the lawyer's arguments were so frivolous as to insult the court's intelligence. In a written statement, the judge said the defendant does not fully appreciate the severity of the allegations against him. When you found that out, what'd you think?
That was the beginning of my suspicions that Al Watkins was not the man for the job. But as all lawyers do, being the snakes that they are, and there are many lawyers that are good, but not many, he convinced me that he knew what he was doing because he was a federal lawyer for over 30 years. So being that I had no understanding of the legal system, I naively trusted him as I naively trusted the FBI when they said they weren't going to arrest me.
Right. And I guess your lawyer also said that you had, parted ways with QAnon and you asked no longer to be associated with QAnon at that point. And you're saying that's not true either.
Yep, that's not true.
Okay. So you're still fully into QAnon.
Well, first of all, it's very important to recognize that QAnon and the QAnon community are very different from Q and the Q drops. The QAnon community has been heavily infiltrated by people that are spreading disinformation as a means of contaminating the very true information that Q is disseminating. For example, JFK Jr. is alive and going to be Donald Trump's president, or the earth is flat. These things are preposterous and can be easily disproven. That's why they were injected into the Q movement or the QAnon movement, so as to contaminate it with ludicrous ideas and contaminate the very real ideas, like we have a debt-based currency that's enslaving our country, or that human and child trafficking, which is the modern day slave trade, is alive and well and is being used as a means to blackmail CEOs, entertainers, and politicians and bankers into submission to serve a New World Order, one world government agenda. Those things are very real. Just look at what happened with Epstein.
Well, on September 3rd, 2021, you pled guilty to a single count of obstructing an official proceedings and agreed to accept the prosecution's recommended sentence, which was 41 to 51 months in prison. What made you accept that plea deal as opposed to going to court?
Well, the fact of the matter is, sir, I can't discuss that too much because that's part of what my motion is talking about. Let me just ask you a question. Have you ever been in solitary confinement before?
I have not.
Yeah, well, some people come out babbling like a baby after 30 days. Okay, I did 10 and a half months.
Wait, you were in solitary confinement for 10 and a half months?
That's correct.
Wow, okay. And what did that do to you?
Made me stronger.
Okay, well, on November 17th, you were sentenced to 41 months in prison. When you finally accepted that, how did you feel?
A certain mix of relief and anger, because Al Watkins assured me that such a thing would not happen. He didn't guarantee it. He said, I don't have a crystal ball, but I really don't think that's going to happen. He was a master manipulator.
All right. So you actually served your sentence at Safford in Safford, Arizona, right?
That is correct.
Okay. You get transferred from a federal holding facility to actual federal prison. When you arrived to federal prison, what was different?
Everything. I wasn't stuck in a cell anymore. That's number one. Number two, I was in general population and able to converse with people and socially interact. Number three, there was a lot of interest on behalf of both the inmates and the guards alike to hear my side of the story and, ask me about everything. And there were some people that naively believed the Operation Mockingbird media and the idea that I was racist, an idea that was completely dispelled once they conversed with me. I worked out a lot, which was good. I did a lot of reading, which was also good. I taught a metaphysics class while I was in federal prison. That was really cool. It was much better than being stuck in a cell. I told a lot of the guys everything that happened. They didn't believe me until they saw the footage on Tucker Carlson.
Well, you're still in prison, though. So what was the worst thing you experienced while in prison? Were there any fights? Were there any threats?
Oh, yeah, there was a riot. Yeah, there was a riot while I was in prison. There was a couple of lockdowns where we weren't allowed to leave the unit. There was a lot of crazy stuff, man.
Okay, but you yourself, anything happened to you personally?
No, God has blessed me quite a lot. I experienced racism when I went to the DC jail, though. That was the very first time I ever experienced racism in my entire life.
How
was
so?
when I was at the DC jail.
How so?
But I was only there for 11 days. And what's interesting about it, though, is that because I wasn't eating, at first, so most of the people that were the guards in the DC jail were people of color, okay? And they were watching CNN. They were watching the Operation Mockingbird media in full swing. And they believed the lie that Trump supporters are racist, that they're all white supremacists. And so being that I was the most recognizable of the Trump supporting crew, they assumed the worst about me. However, it didn't take long for them to converse with me and realize that it wasn't true. And then shortly thereafter, as I continued to essentially starve while I was fasting, I got to watch their hardened hearts turn to flesh. I got to watch them soften their hearts as they saw me suffer. Gandhi calls it self-suffering, and it's about changing the hearts of those that are oppressing you.
Well, you became so popular that you showed up in a bunch of different TV shows. I mean, not you personally, but caricatures of you. The biggest of which was South Park. There was a South Park vaccination special. Let's see what else.
Family Guy as well.
Family Guy. Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Reno 911.
Yep. Saturday Night Live. There's a character based on you. Season 3 of The Boys on Amazon. There's one member of the Storm Chasers that was dressed like you. What was it like to see yourself portrayed in all these different TV shows?
Well, I don't know. I didn't watch any of them. I just heard about them.
Okay. Well, one of the things that prosecutors actually mentioned is that you believe that you're an alien or some sort of higher being that's destined to ascend to another reality. Okay,
so in shamanism, this is called being a star being or having star knowledge or a star child. In Buddhism, it's called being a bodhisattva. It's an ancient tradition. This is something that has gone on for thousands of years. It's a part of ancient beliefs. And it is the belief that the same divine high-frequency souls incarnate on the planet regularly every age to help humanity to ascend into enlightenment and higher levels of consciousness and bliss. That's why I'm here.
Well, on March 30, 2023, your old lawyer, Albert Watkins, announced you had just been released from prison 14 months early. You had served a year and a half. So why did you get out so early, by the way?
No, I didn't serve a year and a half. I served 27 months.
Okay, so 2 years and some change.
That's correct.
So how did you get out 14 months early?
Because I had 6 months of good time accumulated because I didn't have any infractions when I was in prison. In federal prison, you serve 85% of your sentence so long as you have good time. Mm-hmm. You know, as long as you're good, you get good time. And then I did a lot of programming, and thanks to Donald Trump and his passing of the First Step Act, I was able to accrue what are called First Step Act credits by doing programming while I was in prison. And due to that programming, I accrued 6 months worth of extra time off my sentence. So I had a total of a year, 12 months off my sentence, and I was released to halfway house 2 months before that sentence was over.
Well, you had a statement when you got out. You said, "Men of honor admit when they're wrong, not just publicly, but to themselves. I was wrong for entering the Capitol. I have no excuse whatsoever. The behavior is indefensible."
Okay.
Do you still feel that way?
I'm not going to discuss any of this currently because of the motion in the courts. We can talk another time.
Got it. Okay. So now that you're out, are you a Trump supporter or are you not a Trump supporter?
Well, I definitely don't support DeSantis. I like Trump. I don't always agree with Trump. But this is America. We're allowed to have our own opinions. It's a free country, and I'd like to keep it that way.
Well, what do you disagree with Trump?
Well, I don't much care for Operation Warp Speed. I don't much care for the idea that there were sacred Native American burial grounds blown up in Arizona to create the border wall. I don't agree with everything that he said. I don't agree with his drilling for oil when we have infinite, free, clean, wireless energy at our fingertips. If we would just use Tesla tower technology discovered over 100 years ago, that would completely change our economy for the better. It would make resources infinite, which would make war obsolete. It would make poverty obsolete. It would make travel a whole lot easier. It would make our communication so much more simple, so we don't have to erect cell phone towers and satellites. We don't have to use ELFs, extremely low frequency waves that give people cancer and, cause anxiety and depression.
Well, along with you, more than 30 members were arrested for the Capitol 6 uprising, including members of the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, the Three Percenters. One of the 10 Oath Keepers were charged with seditious conspiracy. Stuart Rhodes and Kelly Meggs were sentenced to 18 to 12 years in prison, 18 and 12 years, respectfully. Four of the 5 Proud Boys were charged with seditious conspiracy and were convicted. More than 1,000 people have been charged with federal crimes, and about half of them have pled guilty. Were you in touch with any of the other people who got arrested for this type of thing, or are you just completely by yourself?
No, I was not in touch with anybody. All by myself.
Okay, so...
as most shamans are.
Got it. How do you feel about some of the guys that got like the 18 and 12-year prison sentences?
They have my sympathy. I don't agree with whatever it is that they have espoused. I don't believe that armed violence or armed revolution is the answer whatsoever. I don't necessarily know if that's what they were advocating for. I haven't read their statements. I haven't followed their court cases.
Well, Trump got indicted first in New York, and then he got indicted again in Florida on separate cases. How do you feel about that whole situation?
Well, I think it's hilarious because they just dropped the case in New York. Just goes to show that they don't know anything. They didn't have anything. He just had a Truth Social post about it, about how they dropped the case in New York. So part of the reason why I support Trump so much is because they're not leaving him alone. They keep going after him. And if they really cared about going after corrupt people in Washington, half of the people in Washington right now wouldn't be there. They're going after Trump because he's not establishment and he's not going away. They're going after Trump because they can't buy him off, because they can't blackmail him into submission like everybody else.
Okay, well, I mean, the New York case that he got indicted for has not been dropped. That's not true.
Well, that's what it said on his Truth Social.
Well, I mean, a lot of stuff gets said on Truth Social, but I actually checked, the news everywhere, and no one has actually reported that those charges were dropped.
Maybe it's because the news screwed up and said he was guilty before he was proven guilty.
Right. Well, an hour ago, he got a win. There was a golf course tax probe that I think was dropped, but what he was indicted for in New York is still going, as well as Florida. So,
okay, I'll have to look into it more deeply. I don't want to speak about something I don't have full knowledge on.
Okay. Do you think that Trump will go to prison?
If he does, it will be a travesty. I hope to God that he doesn't. It wouldn't surprise me if the deep state is bold enough to do something like that. But I really don't think that he's guilty of the things that they say he's guilty of. What they're doing is a show trial. It's about the court of public opinion. They did the same thing to Howard Hughes, okay, when he was going against the centralization of the airlines and the federal agencies governing all the airlines and centralizing airline travel in the United States. And they pulled him out and paraded him in front of everybody. They did like a Senate show trial type thing where they tried to grill him in public and they tried to make him look like he was a profiteer off of war, and he handed them their ass. And I think Trump's doing the exact same thing.
Do you feel that Trump will win the election that's coming up?
Well, I don't believe we have elections anymore. We have selection processes. So if Trump does emerge victorious, then it may actually be evidence that our elections are taking some form of legitimacy.
Okay, but when he won the election in 2016, do you feel that that was legitimate?
I would like to think so. I've heard things about the NSA getting involved in stopping the Dominion voting machines from being remotely hacked. I don't trust any elections anymore. What I look for are patterns. What I trust are patterns. And if I see a pattern over several decades, and then I see that same pattern emerge in modern times, then I would trust that the entities that created those patterns decades ago are also creating them now.
Okay. And now you're out. You have a new podcast. You have a new website called the Forbidden Truth Academy. And, what's it like at this point, with all the publicity that you've gotten and everything else like that in terms of how you're progressing with your life?
Well, it's been interesting. I can handle it. I'm doing my best to spread the truth about Tesla Tower technology and how it can set everybody free, because I think that putting the power back into the hands of the people is the most important thing that we can do. Literally putting power back in the hands of the people, giving them infinite free, clean, wireless electricity. So I have been advocating for that very heavily, as well as helping people to try to understand that we are in the midst of very real psychological warfare techniques being used on the public, that it's been going on for a very long time. The government has legally allowed themselves to propagandize the American people. They were for a while not allowed to do that to Americans, but they were allowed to do it to foreign nations. It has been legally allowed finally by the government to propagandize the American people, even though they've been being propagandized for a long time. I am doing my best to be a figure of unity, of love, of forgiveness, of peace, and for freedom. Because I think everybody, Republican and Democrat voters alike, can agree on all of those things.
Well, Jacob, I appreciate you coming in. You did your time. Whatever your actions were back in January 6th, you have, went to prison and you served your time, and you're allowed to say what you went through, and you're allowed to, give that information out in whatever way you see fit. I don't agree with everything you say, but ultimately that's what makes America such a great place. We could all have separate opinions. You know what I mean? We could all support different ideas and different presidents and different religions and so forth. Whatever you choose and whatever you find peace within yourself, I'm happy that you're able to find that peace, and I think that whatever you believe, you should have the right to believe that. And, I wish you only the best. And I hope that whatever goals you set out, you achieve those goals.
Well, thank you. My goal is to unite humanity and help everybody to ascend. My goal is to create unity. My goal is to expand freedom all over the planet. My goal is to basically be a force for good in the world, as it always has been. And if you don't mind, I'd like to plug my Twitter.
Go ahead.
My Twitter is at America Shaman. That's America Shaman, at America Shaman on Twitter. My website is ForbiddenTruthAcademy.com. We have all sorts of courses that are totally free. We have a free podcast you can listen to. We have merchandise that is just freaking kick-ass. It's so awesome. If you haven't seen the merch, you got to check it out. We got yoga pants. We've got slides. We've got coffee mugs. We've got hats. We've got shirts. We've got mouse pads, we've got posters and flags, you name it, we got it. It's all great. It's hilarious. Some of it is really cool. You got to check it out. Lastly, I just want to say thank you for having me. And, this is still a free country. The only way that we can have our rights taken is if we give them away. We must use them before we lose them. So get out there and exercise your freedom of speech. Get out there and, if you can, have your right, exercise your right to bear arms. If you can, all depending on the social media you're on, you won't be censored, and free speech is a real thing. Some social media outlets don't like it when people espouse viewpoints that disagree with their political opinions, but so be it. We're going to win. Humanity's going to win, Vlad. And the transhumanism agenda, this globalist new world order, one world government will fail, just as the Catholic Church and its oppression of the people failed. We are going to have something akin to a mass renaissance, a European enlightenment, except for the entire world, where the truth breaks through the dam of lies. And we are going to awaken, we are going to evolve, we are going to ascend. I'm going to see to it personally.
That's what it is, man. And regardless of whether people agree with you or disagree with you, the one thing I can say from having this conversation, it seems like you have a good heart, and it seems like your heart's in the right place. And listen, man, I wish you all the best. Until next time. Peace.
Namaste.